So we're going to start with an introduction to the topic of literature monitoring and look at the objectives for this webinar. Then we'll look specifically at the searching elements, the literature search elements, the regulations and how you can adhere to those. And then we'll move on to using software in the literature review. And I'm going to provide a couple of checklists, which I hope will be of practical use to you after the webinar. And as I say, we'll take questions at the end and questions halfway through. And of course, if you have any questions once the webinar is finished, you can always email us separately. So it's clear that medical literature monitoring has an overriding objective of ensuring patient safety when they are taking medicinal products. And assessing the biomedical literature for reports of safety relevant information is an important part of the patient safety effort. And as such, it's subject to very stringent regulatory requirements. Literature is one of many ways that adverse events find themselves to be reported, and it accounts for roughly 7%. It's also a very systematic and fairly reliable source, easier to check the provenance of, for example, rather than social media, which is indeed another source. The requirements for monitoring the medical literature cover both the literature, the acquisition, the retrieval of the literature, and any software used in the process, whether that's a spreadsheet or a reference management system. And on top of that, the overall documentation of the processes involved. And this webinar will look at the different functions required to meet the regulatory guidelines. And I hope that at the end of the webinar, you'll have a full idea of how to review what you're doing and to confirm for yourselves that you do have a fully optimized process within the confines of your budget, your resources, and your company. So the regulators, I'm mainly today going to talk about the European Medicines Agency. The FDA in the USA, their regulations follow the EMA very closely, as does the Japanese PMDA. And there's also an ICH, which is a global regulatory initiative to standardize the whole process from a global point of view. But most of what I'm going to refer to refers to these regulators. So let's start with the literature. So why are we screening the literature? So what is the objective of the outcome of choosing a database, writing a search, retrieving the references? And the literature is targeted for these types of reports on the screen. The first one is an ICSR, which is an individual case safety report. The second level of reporting are cumulatively known as aggregate reports. And these can be periodic safety update reports or periodic benefit risk evaluation reports, and developmental safety update reports. And I'll come into a bit more detail on those in a moment. And finally, the literature is also a source for the eventual follow-up and identification of a safety signal. And a safety signal is a new adverse event that's not been seen before for a particular drug, or a new aspect of a known adverse event for that drug. And you're looking for a causal relationship between the drug and the adverse event. So, for example, a cohort of young infant males had a post-birth surgical procedure and were given ibuprofen for pain relief. And then a cohort of those boys developed autism. So is there a causal link between the ibuprofen and the autism? So often that leads a lot more follow-up. So let's look at ICSRs. So when you're reviewing the literature for ICSRs, you're looking for one adverse reaction, for example, nausea, one identifiable patient, 5-year-old female, one suspect drug, acetaminophen, and one identifiable reporter, who's usually the author of the paper, the scientific article. In the case of aggregate reports, the purpose of these is to survey the risk-benefit profile of the medicinal product throughout its life cycle, from pre-marketing through to post-marketing. And in these reports, there is a literature list that is written and cited in Vancouver style that backs up some of these issues, such as lack of efficacy, special populations, pregnancy cases. And these special populations, pregnancy cases, are very important because when a drug goes through clinical trials, the clinical trial candidates are never pregnant, are never elderly, or are never children. So some of the adverse events don't surface until the products are used in the real world, so to speak. And then from time to time, it might be required to conduct ad hoc searches, so extra searches. So you may get a request from one of the regulators to back something up with an ad hoc search. The MAH may need to obtain extra safety information relating to a possible signal. And also other information may need to be followed up for inclusion in the risk-benefit profiles and the risk management plans. And where these searches are done, it is useful if you can integrate these articles with results of your regular searches. So, for example, assign the search to the specific drug, which is the topic. So let's look now right at the beginning at the literature search. And these are quotes from the EMA Good Vigilance Practice, the European Medicines Agency. And they confirm that medical literature is a significant source of information for the monitoring of the safety profile and risk-benefit balance of medicinal products. They also prescribe that the searches, systematic literature searches, should be conducted no less frequently than once a week. The EMA also suggests that you should use Medline or Embase. And they also go on to confirm that you should include published abstracts from meetings. And Embase does include published abstracts from meetings. Medline does not include published abstracts from meetings. So it's fairly prescriptive, but there it is in black and white, exactly what they want you to use. So the next thing is, when should the literature searches start? And again, it's clear, it's expected that the marketing authorization holder will start conducting the literature searches prior to marketing authorization. So as soon as an application is made for approval, literature searches should begin the evaluation of the benefit risk ratio of the medicinal product. And one of the aggregate reports that we touched on earlier was the DSUR, the Developmental Safety Update Report. And this is particularly concerned with pre-marketing products. So products that are at the pre-marketing stage of their life cycle. And indeed, PBRAs also should include data on the efficacy and effectiveness from ongoing trials and literature over the whole life cycle of a product, both pre and post-marketing. Now, there are challenges associated with this literature search. I heard this morning, and I haven't verified it, that 15,000 references a day are added to databases such as Medline and Literature and Embase. What I do know is that over the years, we've seen some unexpected spikes in numbers. So for example, if Embase suddenly have a huge number of conferences they need to add, they tend to add it in one go. And Medline has been seen to be revising records. So we have experienced double the numbers of references one week to the next. So there's a huge volume of references, and sometimes it's unpredictable. Another big problem is duplicate references. The same piece of science can be regurgitated in multiple different journals, or the first author can be switched to the second author. And also, if you, for example, have one alert per product, one reference, one article could discuss 2 drugs, and you therefore might get that article twice, once for drug A and once for drug B. And then building a search strategy is actually quite a professional task because you're trying to balance precision and recall. You want to make sure you don't miss anything because that's an inspection finding, but on the other hand, you don't want too many irrelevant references, which are a waste of time and money. So building the search strategy needs some consideration. The regulations also state that you should regularly maintain the search strategy. Embase, for example, if you use thesaurus indexing terms from Embase, you're probably aware of the fact that Embase updates its thesaurus 3 times a year. Therefore, strictly speaking, you should check that none of your indexing has changed over those years. Similarly, Embase has recently introduced some new indexing for special situations, so you could be taking advantage of that. And Medline also updates its thesaurus annually. The regulations also strongly suggest that you show due diligence in keeping a record of the search strategy and any amendments shown. Output formats can be a problem. They can cause a lot of rekeying, so you might receive your results in one format and then have to put them into a reference management system in RIS, and then perhaps they then need to be exported to XML downstream for the safety database. So output formats can vary. And you need to make sure that you log receipt of the references, because day 0, which I'll come on to in a moment, is extremely important. So it's very important to know the first day that the organization was made aware of a particular article. And then finally, oversight. Increasing numbers of companies are outsourcing literature search so that they can focus on more core competencies in PV. But the responsibility for those searches still lies with the marketing authorization holder. So you do need to make sure that you have oversight of any outsourced search services to check that they are up to standard and documented. So I mentioned day 0. So what's day 0 and why is it significant? Day 0 is the date on which an organization becomes aware of a publication containing the minimum information for an ICSR to qualify for submission. And this is really important because of the downstream processes. If a serious, unexpected adverse reaction is found, that has to be reported to the competent authorities within 7 calendar days. So it's very important for the organization to say clearly the day on which the clock started in order to track timeliness for compliance purposes. So day 0 is very significant. When it comes to the literature search, the guidelines actually even comment on the search strategy. And they say a search is more than a collection of terms used to interrogate a database. So in other words, this needs to be very seriously thought about, and the terms you need to demonstrate that the terms are relevant to the objectives of the search. And again, the guidelines also stress that even if this service is outsourced, each organization needs to satisfy itself that the search service is still appropriate, even though it's been handed to a third party. So we know what our objectives are. We know why we're doing the search. We've looked at the regulations, and we need to now begin at the beginning and choose which database we're going to select. even though the guidelines for the EMA suggest Medline or Embase, they do further down, if you actually look further in the regulations for the EMA, they do state that it's best practice to have selected one or more databases and to establish the most relevant source of published literature for each product. So Medline and Embase are what we call the usual suspects, and everybody is using one or both of those. I've never seen anyone not using one or both. However, the regulations go on to state that the most relevant publications may also be in other types of product. So, for example, if you're searching for herbal medicines, Medline and Embase may not be the most appropriate database there. And there is a database available called Allied and Complementary Medicine, and that specializes in herbals and non-standard medicines. And in fact, Allied and Complementary Medicine database is one of the databases that the EMA uses for its medical literature monitoring service. They use Embase, Allied and Complementary Medicine, and International Pharmaceutical Abstracts. Further down in the regulations, they also suggest very sensibly that if you're looking at risk-benefit analyses, then safety issues during non-clinical studies are important. And so you ought to consider a database that focuses less clinically and more on laboratory-based publications. And Biosis Previews is a very good example of such a database. Biosis focuses on the preclinical stages in the life cycle of a medicinal product. So that's something that should be considered. And Biosis does cover some conferences too. And then speaking of conferences, again, the regulations reiterate that relevant published abstracts from meetings should be reviewed. And Embase covers conferences, Medline does not. Biosis covers some conferences. And then there are also some specialist conferences databases, such as Northern Light Science Conference Abstracts. And there's a new player in this field called Meressier Life Science Conferences and Abstracts. And this is a screenshot from the Meressier database. And I just thought I'd show it because it is an unusual database in that it offers posters. And the posters, as I'm sure you're all aware, are often very early or the first iterations of some science that will end up eventually in a journal. And the Meressier database is very useful because these posters are all fully searchable. So any of the words on this example could be used to retrieve the poster. One more thing, local language journals. So Medline, Embase, all of the databases that I've mentioned so far tend to be global, but tend to have maybe a US bias or a European bias, and certainly don't cover some of the local journals that are relevant for patient safety information. And so the EMA GVP very specifically says that MAH should have procedures in place to monitor local journals in countries where you have a marketing authorization. So local language journals is also an important source of articles for medical literature monitoring. I did a little test that I wanted to share with you. So I chose nabiximols, which is a herbal medicine. It's a plant-based spray. And I used the Dialog adverse event search template. So it's a broad search strategy. And I deduplicated the results. I removed the duplicates. And these are the results I got. So no real surprise. Embase came up with over 50% of the references. Embase indexes drugs very, very well for a high recall. Medline was second with just over 20%. And then biosis also is significant here. The Derwent drug file, which is a small database, but it is absolutely 100% focused on drug information, on any changes to an aspect of a drug or its efficacy or safety. International pharmaceutical abstracts made an appearance. And again, as I said, that's one of the databases that the EMA MLM service uses. And allied and complementary medicine had a few articles too. So what can we take for this? Well, for this particular search, for this particular product, just using Embase or just using Medline wasn't the whole story. There were other articles to be found if you did a search and deduplicated the results. Looking at the search now in more detail, just this thing about precision and recall. Precision is the number of hits that are relevant and recall is the general number. So you're looking for high precision when you're constructing these searches. And so the search construction needs to allow for retrieval of words such as overdose, medication error, and I would also recommend that you don't rely solely on indexing. There have been lots of papers written on whether indexing, while being brilliant, sometimes doesn't tell you the whole story. So you really do need to create a strategy and practice it several times, try several iterations of it in order to get the right balance of precision and recall. There's no acceptable loss of recall when you're searching for pharmacovigilance, so on the side of more. And the other thing to bear in mind is when you're searching for medicinal products, you should search on the active substances, the brand names, and multiple synonyms. Some companies keep synonyms databases, but you should search on all the variations of the product name. And in fact, I find the Embase thesaurus, if you look in the scope notes for a particular product, their scope notes often give a wide range of synonyms for a particular product. So that's quite a good tip if you don't have your own list. Many of the aggregators, so the companies that group together databases, normalize titles, normalize authors, which is wonderful, and they normalize limits. But it's not recommended that you limit to English language publications only, and you should be very careful too not to limit by publication type. So, for example, limiting just to case reports could actually result in you missing a lot of information. Also, you need to be very careful in limiting to human only, because you could also risk missing relevant articles. So while limits are useful, they should be used with care. Now, I've seen some companies use one strategy for both ICSR and aggregate reports, but I've equally seen companies that have two discrete workflows. So they have an ICSR workflow and an aggregate report workflow. Therefore, they have two separate search strategies. And in fact, I know of one organization that had this and then switched to one. So just something to think about. The benefits of a combined strategy are, you could argue that those special populations, lack of efficacy, death, off-label use are useful in retrieving articles that could lead to ICSR criteria. So you could actually combine a search that covers both by using the right terms. It's also easier to manage one strategy if you're checking for thesaurus updates, if you're changing APIs, if you're adding a new product to your portfolio. It also reduces the duplicate references, because if you've got two search strings going to two discrete workflows, some of those references are being reviewed twice by different people. You can also surface the references into one workflow. So if you have one set of references from one strategy, it is possible to use an ICSR resource, which tends to be less expensive than a medical safety specialist. And the ICSR resource could pre-screen or triage the results for aggregate report criteria and possible safety signals. This could result in the more expensive medical specialists only having to review 60% of the references. So there are cost savings that could be obtained from having one strategy. One workflow often can be demonstrated to be more consistent. Consistency approaches fewer inspection findings, and generally speaking, it could be easier to automate any downstream review process. So just something to consider. Another consideration is whether to use alerts or saved searches. Now, I think most people use alerts, although I do know of a couple of companies using saved searches. With saved searches, needless to say, you need to be very careful with your date ranges. You need to be absolutely sure that you're not leaving a gap in a time period. And of particular troublesome are quarterly publications, where the winter series can span 2 years. It can go from 2020 to 2021 because of the winter spans the end of the year and the beginning of the next year. So, and that can be an inspection finding if you've missed things because you haven't checked all of the time period. Whereas with alerts, they're automated. So you will get your alert will be run at the same time in the same time zone. You can choose at the same time every week. So there's less risk of missing references. Many aggregators, many database services also provide an alert history. So they remember the references that have already been sent to you in an alert memory. And so a duplicate will never be sent to you. The date ranges remain consistent. Day zeros will also clear. And some aggregators actually can deduplicate across alert sets. So if you have 2 alerts, one for drug A and one for drug B, and the same article appears for drug A and appears for drug B, that can be deduplicated, and you can just have one article in your system, which will ultimately save time and money. And some aggregator services also provide an audit history, a reference history, an audit trail. So if you change a search strategy, that will be documented. If you change a delivery, that will be documented. And again, these literature searches are subject to inspections, and to be able to demonstrate good vigilance with an audit trail can save a lot of time and effort. On that note, let's look in a bit more detail now at record keeping. So the EMA good vigilance practice does state that records of literature searches should be maintained so that the marketing authorization holders can demonstrate due diligence in this whole searching of literature. So it's very important to retain a record of the search, so you can demonstrate this is the search that was constructed, the databases used, the dates on which the search was run. The results should be retained for a period of time, and the strategies need to be reviewed annually. And you need to be able to demonstrate all of this. And the screenshots on the right of this screen show an example of an audit trail and an alert management system, where you can look at the details of the alert, when it was set up, which databases it's in, look at the search strategy. You can look at the delivery history to confirm that these references were delivered. If they weren't delivered, you can ask for them to be resent. And the audit trail confirms that this reference was created on this date, and then any changes that have been made can also be documented, and it can be confirmed who made the change, why they made the change, and the date. So this is an important part to demonstrate diligence in creating effective and compliant literature searches. If your literature service is outsourced, this is a great idea, particularly if your organization doesn't have an information team, or if the budget for the articles is with the PV team. And it could be that within the PV team, literature search isn't a core skill. However, you do need to make sure that you have complete oversight and because, as I've already said, you have responsibility for everything that's being done. And you should also check that database selection and search strategy are actually a core competence of the outsourced partner. And it's not just a sort of something else that they do. So we've looked at what we should be doing. What are the impacts of a poorly constructed search? Well, this literature searching is part of the pharmacovigilance quality system. And so it impacts the overall effectiveness of that. It's an integral part of patient safety information. So if something is missed, that could have patient safety implications. It's really important to the safety profile of the medicinal product, and it can attract inspection findings, which have many consequences. And these are some of the examples that have been collated over the years of competent authority findings relating specifically to literature. So they do look at the sources used, they do look at the search and how it's been constructed, they do make sure that there's oversight of the quality. Local literature is important and it needs to be demonstrated that that's being reviewed. Missing references obviously are easy to identify as a finding. And then for aggregate reporting, it's recommended that searches for aggregate reports are iterative so that they're done regularly and proactively rather than just before data lock, the date at the end of the 6 monthly period, say, the search is suddenly done then. So that's been a finding. Training of staff responsible for literature, the audit trail demonstrating that you're tracking the results of the search and making sure that all of the appropriate terms are used. So pregnancy outcomes, death, and making sure that the searches are constructed to pick up special populations. And the other thing is variations of product names. So we had a company I heard of recently had to add a load of product names, that the way they were expressing the product names wasn't appropriate. And they had to go back to all of their very significant number of alerts to get the product name variations correct. So just to finish the literature section, I've compressed this all to a checklist. So really this just sums up what we've been talking about so far. So appropriate database selection. Do you have a source for local language publications? Are the searches well considered? You know, are they tried and tested to make sure they're optimal? Are you really minimizing duplicates? And do you have a process for regular review? Do the teams responsible for literature search get regular training? Are they up to date with the fact that there are new subheadings in Embase, or there's a new alert manager system that they can use? And are your output formats really helping the downstream workflows? Do you have oversight of your outsourced partners? And are you documenting the search process? It's quite a lot we've covered. I'm just going to pause there and ask Julie if there are any questions in the chat.
There's nothing in the... Oh, sorry, I'm just seeing one here. Are there any databases for local literature?
That's a really good question, and we get asked this all the time. It would be wonderful if somebody could put together a database of local language publications, but there isn't one as far as I know. Embase, Elsevier, who produce Embase, started to address this, and they put together a French language module. And I heard that they're starting to look at a German language module, but there's no specific information on that. And I think they found it quite challenging. The way that most companies use this is they use an outsource partner, and there are a number of outsource and PV service companies that do this, and often they're working on PDFs and hard copies. So it is a problem. Okay, thank you for the questions. I'm going to press on now.
Sorry, there is one more question. Can we use PubMed database for products marketed in the EU?
Yes, you can. I mean, we used to say years and years ago that PubMed was very US centric, but it does cover the global literature. So yes, it covers EU publications. It does. I would always recommend that you again, if you've got time, the way you should really do this is compare the search in Medline and Embase and just check if you're missing anything. Yeah, thank you. So let's move on to software. If there are any questions that we don't get through, we will answer them at the end or offline. The role of software in literature monitoring, let's look at that now. So we've looked at the gathering the literature, and now we want to look to see what actually happens to that literature. So somebody, usually a human, needs to then look at every single article and review it for ICSR criteria, aggregate report criteria, and for possible further evaluation for safety signals. So how could software improve that process? The other thing is, I've seen lots of companies, and they're all following the same guidelines, as we all must, and everybody's doing this in a slightly different way for many reasons. So let's just look at how software could possibly improve the literature monitoring process. So the first thing is there are some administrative tasks associated with literature monitoring. So for example, the abstract may not have enough information in order to do the full review, and even if an ICSR is found, the full text needs to be submitted. So full text ordering, translation ordering is often done outside of the process and has to be recorded when the full text was ordered, when it arrived, does it affect the day zero date, and are multiple people. So if you have two work streams, you have an ICSR work stream and an aggregate report work stream, are two separate teams ordering two full texts, which is expensive. The articles can be automatically imported and time-stamped. The other thing I have seen is keying. So if articles are coming in from Medline, for example, and then need to be put into a spreadsheet, are they being cut and pasted? And so is there a margin of human error possible? And is it time consuming? Duplicate articles not only create duplication of effort, they can also create inconsistencies. If you get the same article in the system, there is a possibility that it can be reviewed twice in different ways, and that can be a finding. They can also clog up case processing, where case processing then has duplicate cases. Sometimes day zero isn't very clear. So the literature alert has been received, but it's taken some time and maybe spanning a time zone to get the literature into a spreadsheet or some other software. And mostly everybody's now switching to or using E2BR3 XML for downstream applications, for example, for case processing. So, are you in a situation where you get an alert, it goes into, for example, EndNote in RIS format, and then that RIS needs to be converted to XML downstream? And is that introducing churn and more effort? And then what about speed? So are you able to get those serious ICSRs to case processing as fast as you possibly can? Could machine learning help here? And in order to track the quality control, the receipt, is this a huge administrative task, or is this all automatically streamlined and tracked for you? And can you demonstrate oversight of your internal key performance indicators? And can you generate a report that shows that this reviewer reviewed this number of references within this time zone, or that for this product, X number of serious ICSRs were reported in a particular time zone? And then, do you have a consistent end-to-end process? And if it's consistent, then it decreases the risk of findings. And then finally, all software used in pharmacovigilance is part of the quality management system, and as such needs to be validated as fit for purpose. So these are some of the ideas I want to explore in the remaining section of the morning. This is just a picture of the literature monitoring workflow with some software in it. So the references are all essentially coming from the different publishers. They're then published in databases such as PubMed, Embase, Biosis, IPAB, and then often they will be aggregated by a content aggregator who will normalize the titles, normalize the limits, and allow multi-database alerting. There's also some other content that needs to be imported. So the local language literature needs to be imported. And maybe you use something like MedMeme, and so you want the conference information from there imported. With software, all of this content is auto-imported. So it's time-stamped with a day zero. There are no cutting and pasting errors, and there's no ambiguity about when the reference was received. So if you want to reconcile the number of references with ICSR criteria with case processing to see that what they say they received and you say you sent is equal, then automated software can lend itself to that very well. It can also surface the articles in a consistent way so that every article is treated in the same way and moves through a process. And you can also triage or pre-screen references to save the time of the more expensive medical product specialists, as I mentioned earlier. And then as we look at output, so ICSRs can be automatically, references with ICSR criteria can be automatically routed to case processing for submission into the safety database and ultimately to the competent authorities. Literature lists in Vancouver style can be output to Word, deduplicated with comments and sent directly to the medical writers to save them time and effort. References can then be sent into some signal evaluation software downstream or for discussion. And then management reports and compliance reports can be output in Excel or Word. So that would be the ideal literature monitoring workflow if software were deployed. And these are some of the challenges that we hear about medical literature monitoring. So we've already looked at search strategies. We don't have the time or the expertise to maintain or improve our search strategies, or indeed to track them. We spend too much time dealing with duplicates. We're under pressure to consider machine learning and artificial intelligence. Could this help us? Is it too soon? Should we be looking at it? Tracking and reporting KPIs takes too much time, and we really don't don't keep up very well with vendor oversight. And we've discovered that the software we're using isn't validated. Day zero takes us a lot of time to sort out. It's not always clear. And we need to reduce the amount of time that our medical specialists spend reviewing the literature. And these are just some of the challenges. Some may resonate with you, others may not. But it's just a collection of challenges that I wanted to share with you for consideration. And Dialog has a very, very small, tiny medical literature monitoring team. We have a very small team, but between them, they scan over 3 million references a year. Now, the great news for patient safety is we find that on average, about 4% of the references have ICSR criteria. Around 5.5% are valid for aggregate reports, and less than 1% goes on to be evaluated as a possible safety signal. So the great news for patient safety is that up to 95% of these references that we've spent so much time getting right and receiving aren't relevant. So wouldn't it be nice if we could use a software solution to get through that bulk of references quickly, efficiently, and therefore save time and attract no inspection findings? Let's look in a bit more detail at some of those challenges. So duplicates. Everybody, most people have a problem with duplicates. They increase the workload because there's just more references to deal with, which can mean more expense. The reference can be reviewed multiple times inconsistently, which leads to a finding, and cases can be sent to case processing multiple times, and that's a burden on an already very busy case processing environment. And then the reference may then be sent to be reviewed. If it's being pre-screened in a triage situation, then the product safety specialists or medical safety specialists also get duplicates to review. And anything inconsistent like this can bring audit findings, and also it can skew your reports. So your reports aren't truly reflecting the number of unique references being dealt with. And we have seen that some reviewers actually spend time, if they find a reference with valid criteria, then they actually search the body of references to make sure that it's not a duplicate, and to make sure that case processing doesn't get conflicting assessments or duplicate assessments. So it can be a very big problem. And what software can do is it can map one article to multiple products. So in this schematic here, there's an alert for product A, ibuprofen, and there's an alert for product B. And the article discusses both products. Therefore, it's sent to the software twice. So what the software does is it keeps one version of the reference and tags the reference with the multiple drugs, so that there is one instance of the reference and you're not clogging up the system with duplicates. Now, some aggregators have better deduplicating processes than others. They are not all equal. And so there's also, software can also introduce a manual deduplication set to reduce risk. And what this is a screenshot of is it shows that the system has found 2 references that have managed to slip through all the checks. And so it presents to the reviewer, well, this is the primary reference. This is the one we've already received, and on the 5th of May. And then today, on the 6th of May, we received it again. So do you think it's a reference? So then there is a choice for the reviewer to decide whether it is a reference. If they do, they can mark it as a reference, keep the primary reference, and every single action in this potential duplicate identification is recorded in an audit trail, and a duplicate report can be produced to demonstrate which articles were found to be duplicates. Machine learning, it's a big topic. everywhere you look in pharma. And we at Dialog have looked at this, and we do believe that using machine learning for medical literature monitoring can enhance efficiency by prioritizing relevant references and highlighting key concepts. We also think it can reduce the workload, because we think that there is a case for where multiple references are coming through and they're obviously non-relevant. It could be very useful to bulk review them, so tick them all at once as non-relevant. We think it's important for expediting reporting and freeing up some of the time spent to get to case processing. We think that it can help serious ICSRs to be found earlier and therefore submitted earlier before and processed before non-relevant references are looked at. All machine learning works on a feedback loop. So obviously you teach the machine and then you carry on teaching the machine. So it's very important to have a feedback loop so the machine carries on learning and is consistent. But we believe that machine learning models should not introduce risk. And we believe that at this point, they should not replace human reviewers. And in any way, that's how we at Dialog see it. We think that we can produce evidence that somewhere down the road, you could, if you have enough evidence and it's the risk ratio is acceptable, you could do automatic submission to case processing, but we're not there yet. And this just illustrates the basic premise of where we are with machine learning. So the section on the left shows a list of references, and the red stripes are the references with ICSR criteria. And you can see they're distributed unevenly. And then on the right-hand side, once the machine learning algorithm has been applied, the most relevant references, the references with ICSR criteria are at the top, which means they're found faster, reviewed faster, and submitted faster to case processing. So that's where we see the benefits. We're running out of time, so I'm going to speed up a bit. Streamlining full text acquisition. Yep, we've already looked at that. Software can integrate the ordering of the full text and even integrate with Reprints Desk, CCC, so that you can rent or buy articles, and everything to do with full text or translation acquisition is documented in an audit trail. Quality control, this is recommended by the GVP, and sampling of quality control can be much simpler using an automated software. You can, for example, if you have a new reviewer, you can choose to sample the references for that reviewer. If you have a product that requires close monitoring, you can home in on that product. And you can generate reports to demonstrate that you did do the QC, the outcomes of the QC, and it also increases vendor oversight. So it's much easier to produce your samples and to have oversight of the process. Software often also gives you an audit trail. So everything that Tessa Heffernan has done for this particular drug can be downloaded and exported. So if I've got a question on when was this reference reviewed, what were the criteria, who did it, and so on, this could be downloaded at the touch of a button and exported for reporting purposes. And overall, software definitely does increase efficiency. If you have a dashboard, you can drill down and see analytics at the touch of a button, whereas it's much more difficult with a spreadsheet because there's a lot more post-processing involved in a spreadsheet. So software definitely improves oversight. And as I said earlier, any software used in literature monitoring is part of the quality management system. And quality management is particularly important when using software for PV. So validating the software, whether it's a spreadsheet or a specific software application, demonstrates that the product is fit for its use to perform this regulated task. So all software, including spreadsheets, should be validated. And these are just some of the regulations that need to be followed. I'm just going to finish up with some information from the latest UK MHRA PV inspection metrics report. This is a selection from the appendix, and it shows where literature searching, inspection readiness, assessment, periodic update reports, and IT come in the appendix. And then if we can look at the major findings and the minor findings, we can look at, for example, that in terms of the major findings, collection and collation of adverse drug reactions accounted for 12%. And in there somewhere, that includes literature. Quality management system will 15% will include IT systems and the software that you're using, and so on. So you can see that this whole process is very much inspected, and that you do get findings in all of the areas that we've looked at today. And finally, just to leave you with a checklist, again, I'm sure you can all maybe add to this or tick off the ones that you already have covered. You know, is your search and retrieval process optimal? Is day 0 clear? Do you have the best means of reducing duplicates? Is your review process consistent? Do you spend too much time reconciling the references for case processing? Can you demonstrate quality control? Can you track full text and translations? Are you spending too much time on administration? Do you have good oversight? And is your software separate from your vendor? So say you want to change your vendor. Does your vendor own the software that's keeping oversight and documenting your process? Or have you licensed your own software so that if you need to change vendors, all you do is change the IP range for the software and train the vendor on the new software? And finally, is your software validated? I'm very sorry, it's now on time. I've run out of time. I do apologize. I don't think we have time for any questions, but we have captured all of your questions in the chat. And so I will make sure that we follow up individually with each of you with the questions. And if you want to be absolutely sure, do feel free to email us with any extra questions, and we will definitely get back to you. And there's my email address, should you want to email any follow-up questions. So all that remains is to apologize for going a bit over time, to thank you for your attention, and please do get in touch with us if you have any questions. Thank you.